Software validation for production line data exchange. Learn why an MES gateway appliance is considered a black box solution for FDA compliance. Using an MES gateway appliance rather than PC-based technologies eliminates weeks of personnel hours, it's late in the conference, required for FDA software validation. This session will describe roles of the organization to involve, FDA requirements for compliance with software validation, and how to create a secure end-to-end connection between industrial control systems used on the production line and its IT's databases. So a big welcome for Keary Donovan.
Thank you. All right. So as Rob said, I'm gonna tackle this subject from 3 points. One is to understand the roles that are involved in the organization as far as just data communication goes in the first place. And then the other is to discuss security a little bit, to understand what the value of the appliance, using an appliance, is to the organization, and then that will help you understand why it eliminates the software validation. So, but basically, to give you the crux of it right from the get-go, is that our appliance is dedicated firmware. So to the FDA, it sees us as infrastructure rather than a software solution. When you add, for data exchange, all the Windows-based, PC-based solutions is what incurs the validation. And so as I go through our presentation, you'll understand when we get to the qualification versus validation, why that is with our hardware. Let's get this clicker the right way. We say, so we're a manufacturer of an MES gateway appliance, and to us, this IoT subject, for us in controls and automation, it isn't necessarily a new concept. There's been plenty of data traffic in manufacturing for a long time, but it was called telemetry, or it's part of the data acquisition of SCADA. And so we see the IoT subject as more of an evolution than a revolution. We're not talking about putting things in the cloud. We're not talking about augmented reality. We're talking about the connection to the industrial control systems, like a PLC, to a database, translating those protocols that are on the machines to a database where, when it's in that format now, any analytic software can touch it, any business intelligence software can do something with it now in that database format, bidirectionally. Our appliance isn't just a technical solution, it's an organizational solution too. And we always start our presentations with describing what those 3 parts of the organization are. So first we have production management. They're the ones that need the data in the first place. They have dashboards, and from their perspective, they don't understand why this is hard. Manufacturing, process engineers, and the production managers don't understand when they're looking at an HMI why they can't just get that information that they're looking at over there on that computer screen. And that's really the big mystery, and that's what we're gonna, so from a production manager's point of view, they are stuck with the fact that they are likely not a Java programmer, and they are likely not to be PLC programmers either. So when the controls engineer and the IT department are pointing at each other and talking about their conflicts, production doesn't really understand what's at the kernel of that because we're all walking around connected on our phones. We didn't disconnect from our work back at the office, so why can't we do that with our production data? PCs are what's doing it. Every security patch, every OPC link that is going to that PC for data exchange is interfering with the machines, and that's what creates the conflict. So, from an engineering standpoint, that is a $13 million F1 McLaren. It's a supercar. It runs, all of its controls are totally dependent on a C8 card from a 1990 compact laptop. That's only available on eBay if you're lucky. We use this anecdote to portray what engineering, where they live. It is, when we say it's a patchwork of systems, it's stuff like this. It's a patchwork of systems that over the decades, each solution got stacked on top of another. And when you're talking about data communication, you have to be able to talk to those things because those processes are in place and they're systematic and they assure the quality that everybody is relying on. The next is IT. So here's where the conflict comes. So when we're talking about PCs on the production line, you have to deal with IT because that's who's responsible for it. Our example for the IT side is Stuxnet. Stuxnet was a virus that was not looking for ransomware. It wasn't trying to get IDs. It was looking for OT networks that were using a particular Siemens PLC. When it found the Siemens PLC, it recorded it and waited until it found another one until they had enough of it. It's called a 0 days hack. Once they had enough of those Siemens PLCs in the same region, in the same area, they launched their virus. They were able to control the motors that the Siemens PLC was attached to and spin them past the speed that they were meant to, and that's how the Iran nuclear centrifuges broke. This is what IT is dealing with. When customers are talking about combining their IT network or bringing the Ethernet from the office down to the production line, this is what IT is worried about. Cyber physical control is what it's called. If you can get on the network and if you are putting something with known vulnerabilities either on the network or from the operating system, you are opening up the machine controls to a hack. So IT doesn't want it. So with those three roles described, how likely is it that we're going to get our data exchanged? And this is the crux of when we're on panels or when we're talking at conferences like this, and everybody's asking, why is this hard? Why can't we get this together? Why aren't we just exchanging data? This is why. The very basis for IT is in conflict with the engineers on the production floor. The data is different and their roles are different. Security to IT means total confidentiality. We don't want to see it, we don't want it known, we can't have anybody get to it. Security for OT, for the engineers, is a machine up and available constantly. It has to be visible. Change management, that's another big one. All those processes that are in place, do all the pass-fail, that keep a recall from coming, are set. They're not to be tinkered with. If something does have to be changed, it has to be scheduled way in advance, and it's really done reluctantly. IT, they want to change everything all the time. If they could send a security patchwork every minute, they'd do it. Then they'll hit the network with those huge packets of data, which brings us to the last really big conflict between them, is the data itself. On-off bits from a machine control versus large operating system packets are totally different. So when IT wants to connect to the machines, they come with that perspective of let's use an OPC-based middleware and pull the network for the data all the time. That's terrible for latency issues for the machine. Deterministic networks, things are synchronized on the machine. You can't have huge packets hitting that network. And with all of these perspectives, you see how IoT gets talked about as being there, but the costs associated with solving that problem that everybody know about are too high for small and mid-sized manufacturers. When you're talking about solving those issues with software, you really have to throw a lot of personnel and a lot of money at it, and the smaller manufacturers just aren't able to do that. Okay, unless you connect it correctly. So that's why we advise people to connect with an appliance rather than software and PC-based solutions. These are ISA 95 levels. I'm going to have an infographic that goes into this in a little more detail. But basically, the standard was set up a long time ago by ISA for communication from controls and automation to the enterprise. So IT lives on the blue. In level 4, that's where the ERP system would be. That's where the planning and logistics happens. On level 3, that's where a lot of quality management systems are located, MES systems, all the software that production is using to make the decisions that they're trying to make everything more efficient and more profitable. This is where the database table is going to reside. That's where we want to communicate with it. We could communicate with ERP systems like SAP, but no IT department in the world is going to let you go directly to it. It's always on a staging table. On level 1 and level 2, that's the controls and automation. You have continuous control, you have the batch operations, and you have recipe information, and it's discrete control, on, off, in industrial protocols. What's an appliance? Okay, when we think of computers, it's a hard drive. It's running software applications. It has disk storage. It has a certain amount of processing power. But it's also general purpose. Anything can be added to that. That general purpose operating system takes quality software, takes whatever, and that's where the vulnerability is. An appliance is a specialized device that has dedicated firmware. It's closed architecture. Ours runs on Linux. It doesn't have to, but it does. There's less vulnerability. And the way to think of us as what it's a gateway appliance, MES gateway appliance. So we're talking to that level 3 as a gateway, translating the protocols to the database languages and vice versa as an appliance. So an example of another gateway appliance is like a modem. It only does one thing. You're not expected to program it. You plug it in and it does what it's supposed to do. Another version of appliance, embedded software, which is what I mean by dedicated architecture, is a modern day gas pump. Its processor's in there, it's a computer, but you can't get to it. You gotta lift the hood, get to the processor, and it does one thing. So that's what I mean by an appliance. Our appliance, the reason it's secure is because it's translating, not transferring packets of data. So we're talking about the Stuxnet example. That was a packet of data traveling across the industrial control systems via USB sticks from integrators' computers up to the IT department. Ours is separated, 2 different Ethernet ports on separate networks, not transferring the packets of data, but translating the protocols. And what that means is you're not, the IT department doesn't have to hide us from the rest of the world. There aren't packets of data coming to us in the first place. So all of the IT efforts, all of the budgets that get into like demilitarized zones, white hat firewalls, all this stuff, there's a physical firewall in the appliance. That's what it's made to do, is keep those networks separate but connected. This is our slide for when we talk about translating for the manufacturing engineers. What that means is you don't have to know ladder logic because we know that language. You don't have to know SQL because we're auto-programming it for you. The interface on the appliance is configuring, not programming. It's reduced down to field mapping. I know this register or this tag in the PLC is the one I need for runtime or the pass-fail information, and I want this information when it occurs over here in the database so that my software can use it. And that's what I mean by the translating at the appliance. So here's just a couple differences between a PC-based software solution versus a firmware embedded system like ours. The operating system is embedded, like the gas pump example. The computer is general purpose, running on a hard drive, accessible, vulnerable, needs all kinds of security stuff. The applications, 1, translate industrial protocols for databases, that's it. We use native drivers from all those manufacturers. We're talking directly in their software without needing their software. General purpose computer takes whatever you add to it, through many ports, however you want to add to it, accessible. The network ports. Computers are living on the same network. That means IT needs to manage them. That's where the conflict comes with engineering. Our network ports on an appliance, it's made to separate them. They're different networks, different NIC ports. So those are the main differences. Now to the FDA software validation pain. So we have learned through our end users that we're a black box to the FDA. And what does that mean? When software is added to the production and process control, you have to meet 21 CFR 820. All of it needs to be documented. You have to validate the software for intended use for the established protocol, and any of the software changes that occur, security patches, new features, they have to be validated also. All of the validation activities have to be documented as well. So we eliminate the FDA software validation for the data exchange. You know, there's still validation on the PLC, there's still validation on whatever MES software, quality software, but to get the data to an existing validated production line or to a new one coming up that you're designing in the lab, we're talking about understanding how each command and each function works and how those are supposed to be taken advantage of from a process point of view. That's the level of validation. It takes, and this is third-party information, but they basically, we've been told by our end users that requires, in general, about 2 weeks of time for a team of people. So we were talking about simplifying the network earlier. That simplifies, you know, the $60,000 network that needs to be set up for all the polling for the way any PC-based data exchange goes. Well, now for the validation, you're talking about a team of engineers validating the processes, document everything. You're talking about 2 weeks for a team of people, and we've been told we eliminate about $80,000 worth of cost for all of those processes. And why? Because all they have to do is qualification for our box instead of validation. All that's required for our box, because it's embedded software, because it's an appliance doing one thing, is just document it to make sure that it does what it says it's going to do. So when your machine goes out or a machine gets used, all that's required is what's referred to as IQ, OQ, PQ, and people that are implementing this have experience with that. But so as an appliance doing one thing, all that's required is qualification versus validation. And so that's what we mean by eliminating the software validation for data exchange. So you don't need to see every word for this discussion, and we have infographics at booth 1903 if we want to get the details and stuff. But when we were talking about level 4 and level 3 in the blue earlier, that's what we're talking about. That's where the database servers live. That's where the MES software and the databases work. What we're showing is the appliance has the physical separation of the networks, so that we're not, and then we're doing with our dedicated firmware, talking to the machine controls, making it able to communicate with the devices themselves, whether it's a vision system or barcode reader for bad scans for people working on it, and then the process itself. And so this is where, when we're talking about qualification, those are the kind of things that we're talking about. Being able to take those qualification processes and communicate it with the ERP. And this is not our standard or our way of communicating. This is where we fit on the ISO 95 standard for communication with ERP systems. But I just wanted to put that up for helping you guys with questions that you have relative to where we're sitting on the network.